All right, so I was doing some work for another case, and this one I was working on some stuff for the Alec Baldwin Rust movie issue. And during the trial, they had the representative there from the manufacturer, and he's talking about how his firearms are well made. They're very precise. They're very high quality, which is true. This is a very nice pistol. This is a reproduction of the Army single action. 45 long Colt, similar to what he was using. Now this is blued, and this is the shorter barrel. I think he had the longer barrel unit. But the issue with one of the things with this firearm is that as you fire the weapon, the propellant is burning, and it's letting out its gases, and in those gases is burned and half burned carbon that continues to burn, and it will get into the frame up here. It'll get on this part of the barrel. It'll get all over this area here, and it'll get into the frame down here, and it will start to work itself back. And this piece right here, if you look at it, when you're having the pistol, it's down. It's in a very flat area, so it collects dirt and etc. But mainly you have the soot, the carbon that builds up, and it'll work its way back, and then this will stick. So as you go to half cock, see if we can see this, it's under a spring. So as you go to half cock, it sits down. It's the only time it moves down. And then this goes into the cylinder lock, which is right here. And this is what locks the cylinder, and this allows you to rotate the cylinder so you can load or unload it. When it jams, the problem is, especially if you're a right-handed firer, you're trying to manipulate the cylinder with your right hand, holding back the hammer with your left hand and trying to work the mechanism so that you can get the cylinder unlocked so that you can open the feed gate and take the ammunition out. And I know this for a fact because I had it happen to me when I was at the range one time, it was a few months ago, and it misfires. See, at half cock, there's your safety. It's not supposed to go forward. And now this is what the FBI agent was saying, that it should, do that. Now let's release it here. But if this thing is sticking, they'll still go forward. So does that have an issue with maybe partly what happened? I don't know. But we do know from testimony that Seth Kinney disassembled and reassembled the firearm. Now, I'm assuming he's trained. He's an armorer. Myself, I am a still certified, Department of Defense instructor. I've run ranges. I used to work with range control and some other things, and actually took the gunsmith course back in the early 90s. I just did that on my own, just for my own knowledge of firearms. I started out as a medic, and I carried the 45 automatic, which is actually a semi-automatic. They call it 45 automatic, but it's actually 40, the semi-automatic. But I do the TI training on the 240 Bravo, which is a machine gun, the 249 SAW, which is the smaller caliber machine gun. Squad automatic weapon is what they call it. And then the M2, which is the 50 cal, that's the heavy caliber, heavy duty machine gun. The Mark 19 is the 40 caliber, 40 millimeter grenade launcher, and I haven't really, had mess with that much, other than knowing how to load it and shoot it, and that kind of stuff. Same with the 203. The 203 is the under barrel grenade launcher, and I know how to operate that. But it's primarily I was with weapons, so M16, M4, and then the ranges. Actually set up the ranges the last 5 years, I think, 5 or 6 years. Set up the ranges, and so I would set up the zero range, and I had another staff sergeant that ran the qualification range. And so you'd come to my range first and zero, and then you'd go over to the qualification range. So anyway, so I know a little bit, maybe a little bit about firearms. But this is the Pieta, and it's a very nice manufactured made firearm. When it's working properly, it works great. But one of the issues always with this weapon was its problem to misfire. And then here recently, I started looking at some of the Richard Allen stuff, and there's just too much stuff that just doesn't make sense. They have a photograph of a firearm that has a threaded barrel, so that one's suppressor ready. So that's not a normal firearm that someone goes in the store to buy. He's also using Winchester hollow points with the tip is very similar to the old Talon round. It's a law enforcement only round. Now, it's not to say that civilians couldn't buy it, but back in the 90s and the late 80s, they were talking about black Talon rounds. There's actually a movie, I think it was in one of the Lethal Weapon movies, where they were going after what they called cop killer bullets, and they were talking about the black Talon round. There was some mythical stuff out there about it being Teflon and it would pierce body armor. And at the time of that, you were using second chance armor, and that's the vest that I used to wear was the second chance soft body armor. And then, of course, going over to Afghanistan, it's a little bit different. I had the SAPI plates, which is the hardened ceramic plates. But so there's some myths around that. It stopped production in 2000. And later it was picked up again. Winchester still manufactures it under another name. It's called the T Series, Tactical Series. It's pretty much a law enforcement only round. Now, it's not to say that you can't buy it, that you can't get it. You pretty much get it. Pretty much just about everything you want online But I carried law enforcement only rounds when I was a law enforcement officer, and I carried the Glock 40 caliber. So I'm familiar with the ammunition that they're saying that Ricky Allen had. And to me, it looks as though there was a law enforcement person on scene that somehow cycled their firearm and contaminated the crime scene. Then when you get into CSI tried it several times and couldn't match the markings on the rim or in the head stamp of the round that was found at the crime scene. And of course, the reason for that is it's not the same weapon. It's not the same weapon. And I've not seen photographs yet of that actual round as far as the head stamp goes. All I see on the internet right now is just a drawing. And you got little red squiggle lines. It's supposed to indicate what the ejector pin put into the head stamp. And even in that, you see they don't match. You have two that are very similar and one that's not even close to being with the other two. So, I mean, none of this really makes any sense. You have a P226 that has a threaded barrel that's suppressor ready. And then you have a law enforcement only round. And then supposedly he has a keepsake box, as they call, in the dresser drawer or the nightstand drawer, and they found one in there, and it's just not believable. It isn't. It's not believable. So there's just too many questions with this whole thing, There's too many questions. You have the car that has a humped up roof. It's a sloped roof, but from the windshield A pillar to the B pillar, the roof line starts to slope upward, and then before the B pillar starts to slope downward. And yet on that movie, that roof line's fairly flat from the windshield to the back. It pretty much slopes down at a singular angle. It's not going up and down like the Ford Focus. And of course, it's grainy, it's out of focus. And you didn't secure that vehicle. You don't have any license plate information on it. You didn't secure the vehicle. You didn't secure the driver. You didn't identify the driver. You don't have any of that. All you have is a grainy, out of focus video that's supposedly saying that proves he was there. But the thing of it is, that I see with the time, they said, well, this is the timestamp on the video, but it's wrong. Well, it's X amount of minutes wrong. Well, no, not really. Not really. It's about 6 minutes off from what I see, but it wasn't set up for daylight savings time. So you're trying to say, oh, well, this was at 2:30 or whatever that you're talking about. And really it was around 12:45. So you're saying 1:47, and if you didn't set it up properly for daylight savings time, which is why the time is off, you're looking at 12:47 if I'm reading that right. And it's on a route that Richard Allen said I didn't go that way. He drives through town from where he lives, and if you look at the route from where he lives to where he said he parked, it's about a 5-minute, 8-minute trip at the most. And yet the route they're saying, well, this is the route that you took, and we have proof because we saw your car. But you can't identify anything out of the video that they showed. You can't identify anything. And yet to take that route, you have to go far to the east, then go north, then get back on the one road, and then head west. And supposedly as he's driving west to go park, makes absolutely no sense. So he didn't want to go to lunch with everybody, so he just decided, I know, I'll go to the park and find somebody to rape. And he takes the longest way to get there. Doesn't make any sense. Just does not make any sense. And then you have sunlight. We got sunlight through his wheels. We know it was his car because we can see the sunlight coming. He has spoked aluminum wheels on a Ford SE, Special Edition SE. It's the lowest cost option Ford Focus that you could purchase. This isn't a very rich guy. So he bought a decent car that he needs to run around in. And it's not the most expensive car, Ford Focus, that Ford sells. Yet they all come with spoked aluminum wheels. So does the Honda. So does the Toyota. So does the Kia. So does the Hyundai. I was reading something. Somebody mentioned the Subaru. And you just get on a list of, and you can do this easily on the internet today. Just look up, go to Auto Trader or go to Kelly Blue Book shows you the cars and the specifications. Emmons, another one, but just look at like Auto Trader or Cars.com and just look at the photographs of the cars. Put in a 2016 SUV. Very few cars that we make today have steel wheels. This isn't 1970 where everything had a steel wheel and a hubcap and everything else. This isn't a Ford LTD. It's not a Delta 88 or a Cadillac Fleetwood or anything like that. And most of your cars that you see with steel wheels are law enforcement emergency vehicles because you don't want to have aluminum wheels on that. If you're in a high-speed pursuit, the last thing you need is your wheel to fail. So those are speed-rated, DOT-approved steel wheels. So if you look on the Ford Explorer, the Dodge Charger, some of the other cars that the police use, those are steel wheels. And then you have a police chief that says, well, he knew it was his car, identified his car because of the hubcaps. His car didn't have hubcaps. How did you find hubcaps on a aluminum wheel that doesn't have hubcaps? But this is the stuff that's presented to the jury, and the jury doesn't know this. And I've seen that in both of these cases. You're talking about firearms and people getting confused because the jury doesn't know that. The jury doesn't know about this little piece that jams up that makes this misfire. Jury doesn't know that. The jury doesn't know about single action to where you pull the hammer back, cock it, and then pull the trigger. And dry firing a weapon anyway is not a good thing to do. Just do it here, but at half cock. But if you bring that, there's your safety. But if that sear was damaged, and we don't know what the damage was because the FBI technician didn't disassemble this and photograph anything before he beat it with a mallet and ended up breaking the sear. So in your sear, you have the hammer goes back and it's held by the trigger. So as the trigger moves forward, it slides off the sear, and now this has a spring. The spring is down in here, and it has a spring that makes the hammer go forward. And as you see that, I'll show this. As you see that little bump right there? That's the firing pin right here. I go try this again. Okay, so pull the trigger. All right, see that hole? See that pin come through? That's the firing pin that sets off the primer. This is the firing pin. Jury doesn't understand that stuff. Yeah. And then you look at Karen Reed. Supposedly she drove backwards in a snowstorm at 24 miles an hour, and she just floored it to 3/4 throttle from a dead stop. All she would get is wheel spin because the tires aren't going to grab traction. You're in the snow. It is snowing. So whether you have ice forming on the roadway or it's wet because the snow is hitting that and it's starting to melt. But then you have the other problem of driving backwards at 24 miles an hour and keeping the car straight, keeping the car controlled. Cars driving backwards are unstable. You have to train to do that properly. You have to do that. So if you want to do a reverse 180 or a J turn or any of these other moves and drift turns and stuff like that, you need to practice for that. You need to practice. But yet supposedly she hit her boyfriend's hand at 24 miles an hour that shattered the glass that he was holding. So he had a cocktail glass from the bar after they left the bar. And it shattered the glass. It would have shattered his hand. Broken every bone in his hand. 24 miles an hour, that's 35 feet per second, a little over. The standard is 1.47. So 1.47 feet per second per 1 mile an hour. Now, if you get hit by a train at 1 mile an hour, you're likely to be dead because the train weighs thousands of tons. You know, if a train hits your car at 1 mile an hour, it's going to get some significant damage. A lot more than if you got hit by a sedan at 1 mile an hour. There'd be a difference. But the other issue is, and this was the state trooper that didn't even understand physics. The issue is not how much you weigh, it's how fast you're going. And this is also with ballistics, and I studied ballistics. So you have something lightweight that is flying super fast. It carries a lot of energy with it. You look at the M16, the M4, and you're looking at a 55 grain bullet hitting you at supersonic speed. Or compare that to a 9mm round that is maybe twice as much, a little more twice as much, 118 grain, 120, 125 grain, 130 grain, somewhere around in there, depending on what you got. but it's moving at a third or the fourth of the speed. Now, if you're standing right in front of the person, doesn't really matter. You're going to be in a world of hurt. But if you're 3, 4, 500 meters away, it's going to make a super difference. And then when you get into something like the 50 caliber, the machine gun or the sniper rifle, that is a huge round. It's half-inch in diameter, and it's about an inch and a half long. Copper jacketed, lead core. That's the basic round. And then you got your special operations, your special rounds. But it's huge, it's large, it's heavy, and it's hitting you with just a tremendous amount of muzzle energy. This is based by how much it weighs and what speed it's going. So you have a state trooper that doesn't even understand the simple calculation of muzzle energy. And now you're talking about a vehicle, but it's actually the same calculation. And what it is velocity squared. Velocity squared. So 35 feet per second squared. That's a lot of energy. And she's driving a 6-ton vehicle. She didn't have a little car. I couldn't believe it at first either, because most people are thinking, well, it's probably about 3,500 pounds to 4,500. No, it's 6,000 pounds. That's 3 tons. I think I just, I think I just said 6 tons, but no, it's 3 tons, 6,000 pounds, 2,000 pounds per ton. At 35 feet per second squared. And then you have inertia and you have momentum. Because now you have the momentum. They're saying she backed up 60 feet. So now you have the momentum. And the trooper's being asked about momentum. Deer in the headlights. He doesn't have a clue what you're talking about. Not a clue. Not a clue. But I don't know the jury knows this. And now, fortunately for her, she got a mistrial and she's up for trial again. But then you look at the other stuff that went on. You know, you have the person that owns the home that's a police officer himself, and he doesn't even bother to come out and check. Has a fellow Boston police officer who's dead and dumped on his front yard, and he doesn't even come out to check. So either he knew what went on, or he doesn't care, or both. You just can't make this stuff up. Can't make this stuff up. Why does Ricky Allen have only law enforcement only rounds with a firearm that's suppressor ready as a manager of Walmart? Because supposedly he bought it in 2001. Where's the FBI form on that? Where's the receipt by serial number that shows he actually purchased that firearm? Because it would be interesting to go into the records, and I don't have the ability to do that, but it'd be interesting to go into the records and see who actually purchased that firearm. And where did he purchase it? Supposedly they know that. So that gun store in 2001 is selling 226 Sig Sauers that are suppressor ready to basic civilians. See, you got to understand, back in the 80s and the 90s and all that stuff, the 40 caliber round was a very new round. You had to shoot out with the FBI, and the FBI one started looking at, we need something a little bit better to issue our field officers beyond the typical 38 special revolver, which was the Smith & Wesson 29, which was the primary firearm. I believe it was Smith & Wesson 29. And then the Model 66. I have a Model 66 357. And, but it fires 38 special. So 357 will fire 38 special or 38 plus P. So they were looking at something a little bit stronger, and that's where they got into starting to study the 10 millimeter round. You think it's 1 millimeter, but it makes a bit of a difference. You're going up from a 118 grain bullet over to almost a 230 grain bullet. That's a tremendous difference. And there's still subsonic rounds yeah, for the most part. Yeah, they're a subsonic round, but it's still hitting you with enough force to knock you down with one shot, and that's what the FBI was looking for. And that was the development of the 40 caliber round, because they're looking at the 40 caliber round uh, for the FBI at the same time the FBI started looking at 10 millimeter rounds, and they went to the 10 millimeter, and now they've gone back. I believe everything I'm reading now is they're going back to the 9 millimeter. Whatever. I know that I did a test. This was in the early 90s. I think it was 1990. I was out with an FBI agent to where we were looking at different types of steel or steel plate for small, sections you put in the door skin to protect the driver and the occupants. And now the ballistic protection that I was familiar with, and this goes back to the late 70s, was the Kevlar panel. And you see that, you open up the door on the Beast, as President Trump's vehicle, you see how thick those doors are because ballistically protected. Now, when I was in Afghanistan, we had vehicles that were ballistically protected. From the outside, it looks like just a regular SUV, but from the inside, yeah, you got a lot of ballistic protection around you. So it would handle an AK-40 round or AK-47 round. It is not going to stop an RPG, but and certain IEDs. I was there with an Afghan general that got hit by an IED, killed his driver and injured the other two, and he was okay. And that's a long time ago, but it almost blew his vehicle in half. I think it killed the driver instantly. But but you do ballistic protection, and a lot of that back then was Kevlar. But then doing the Kevlar and you taking it to a shop where they're going to put the Kevlar in, it gets really expensive. So you look for like inserts that you could take a car and have a temporary insert, and there's various types of steel that you would use for that. And I know that we were out playing around one day, and anyway, let's digress. But this is back when they were looking at the 10 millimeter and the 9 millimeter, and we were shooting 9 millimeter. He might have had a 10, I'm not sure, but I had a 357. He had 357 ammo, but he didn't have a 357 with him. So I'm like, well, I got one 357. So uh, I let him use that one to practice with, and then I shot some of the ammo in the 357. But anyway, that was a long time ago, and it doesn't really have anything to do with here. But the 40 caliber round was based off of a law enforcement request to have something that was a little bit stronger than the 9 millimeter or the 38 special, and they wanted something a little bit better to handle than the 45 ACP, because the only other thing that people carried back then pretty much was the 45. And the biggest complaint on the 45 was the recoil. And as you move from having your FBI agents that are men, and now you have more FBI agents that are female, they were struggling. The grips were too thick for their hands, and the 45 had a lot of recoil. So then you can go to a smaller frame revolver, and even the Model 29, which was the 38, but they're trying to get to something that would, in a way, be a little bit more female friendly, but at the same time, you can broadcast it to everybody. As an FBI agent, and you think about an agency that's that large. So you're talking about the FBI. It's similar with the Army. You have to come up with a firearm in your inventory that pretty much works for everybody. So I can take 100 soldiers out to the range and give them 100 M9 9 millimeters and teach them how to shoot and how to get the bullets on target and how to qualify. It's much more difficult when you have 10 using a 38 and 10 using a 40 and 10 using a 9 millimeter, 10 using a 10 millimeter, and you see the problem. And then you also have supply chain problems, and not so much supply chain, but part of your ERP, but as far as your inventory control, because now you have different ammunition you have to buy too. So if I have X amount of officers at one location, what are they carrying? Because you got to supply the ammunition, you have the cleaning kits, uh, weapons, maintenance. You have to have somebody there that knows how to maintain the weapons. Now, I would think that as an FBI agent, you would know how to clean and maintain your own firearm. I would think that at least at the minimum you should. But we know for a fact there's police departments to where they have the size that their actual officers know very little about the firearm itself because they turn it in, they sign it out. Now, pretty much today, we really don't do that anymore. But you look at the older, you go back to the 70s of Chicago Police Department where you sign out your shotgun. You don't know who had the shotgun before you. You don't know if there's something wrong with it. You just sign it out and you put it in your car. You sign out your car. And then at the end of your shift, you bring the car back, turn in your handheld radio if you have one, and turn in the shotgun. You go down to the armory and you turn in your revolver and whatever else and the ammunition and all that stuff. And then you go home. Things have changed. We now have take home cars. People are, carry their own stuff. I had a take home car. So, and I was responsible. And of course, I put it on myself anyway, responsible for the cleaning and the maintenance of my own firearm. Why? Because I'm the one that's going to have to use it. I might have to use it to protect a citizen. I might have to use it to protect myself, and it has to be working when I need it. And this was the questions and the issues that the FBI was having. They have to have a firearm with enough knockdown power that when you're out by yourself, I mean, if you're out by yourself, you got maybe a partner with you, if you're lucky. Most of the time, I was out by myself. I responded to a prison riot by myself. We asked for a called over request for the town that was. No, they didn't have anybody available. It took an hour for the state police to get there. By the time they got there, everything was resolved. Um, and stuff like that. So but that's what was going on with the 40 caliber. It was a pretty much a law enforcement round. Not to say that civilians couldn't buy it or own it, but anyway, a lot of it just doesn't make sense. A lot of it just doesn't make sense. Anyway.